Hello. Thank you for joining today's visioning session and discussion on Tacoma Tideflats Subarea Plan. I'm Marcy Wagner from the consultant team, and I'll be facilitating the meeting today. Today's discussion is focused on land use and economic development. This is the first of 3 sessions. Thursday evenings will be a focus on environment and health, and Saturdays on transportation and infrastructure. We welcome your participation in all 3 sessions if you are interested. As a reminder, this meeting will also be recorded for our reference only. Before we begin, this land recognition was developed in collaboration with tribal staff. Let us acknowledge that this project is being conducted on the historical and current homelands of the Puyallup tribe of Indians. Since time immemorial, they have hunted, fished, and gathered in the Tacoma Tideflats, and they retain these rights to this day. Let us take this moment to recognize the unique responsibility in being co-stewards with the tribe over these lands and waters, and work with them to safeguard their treaty-protected rights. In a few moments, we'll invite the panelists to introduce themselves. Then we'll hear a project overview by a member of the project management team, followed by our panel discussions. I will be asking our panelists questions about the vision for the Tideflats. After each panel discussion, we'll invite our audience to submit questions using the Zoom Q&A feature. We will then pose those to the panelists or to representatives of the project. We also have an online survey available at cityoftacoma.org/tideflats, as you see on the bottom of this slide, if you'd like to share your thoughts that way as well. The project management team for the Tideflats area is composed of representatives from each of the 5 participating agencies in the Puyallup tribe. The representatives are Steve Atkinson from the city of Tacoma, Steve Friddle from the city of Fife, Sean Gaffney from Pierce County, Andrew Strobel from the Puyallup tribe of Indians, and Deirdre Wilson from the Port of Tacoma. Sean Gaffney, planning manager for Pierce County, will be providing our project overview presentation today. The consultant team includes myself, Rebecca Fornaby, Deborah Monkberg, who is the consultant team lead, and Radhika Nair. Deborah and Radhika will also be assisting with the questions from the audience today. The panel, I'd like to thank each of our panelists for participating in today's discussion about the vision for the Tideflats future from a land use and economic development perspective. I'd like to invite the panelists to each take about a minute to introduce themselves and their organization. I'm going to start with Frank Boykin. Frank. Do we have Frank available?
Good afternoon. I presume you can hear me now.
There. Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm the director for the Manufacturing Industrial Council for the South Sound, a program of the Tacoma Pierce County Chamber representing more than 1,300 businesses. The MIC is the voice of the manufacturing, industrial, and maritime communities. Our work means leading via shared values of economic prosperity, social equity, and environmental stewardship, and advocating for policy that permanently protects Tacoma's industrial lands as a place for jobs. A key MIC priority is to save jobs that support local families, focusing on manufacturing, industrial, and of course, maritime organizations with their high wage jobs. My expectation is to have a very good dialogue today. I'm looking forward to fielding questions and hearing from others. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank. Yvonne McCarty.
Hi, everybody. My name is Yvonne McCarty. I want to thank you for inviting me to participate. I am the chair of the Northeast Tacoma Neighborhood Council. This is my, I'm going into my 5th year as leading that group. I was born and raised in Northeast Tacoma. In fact, 5 generations of my family have called Northeast Tacoma home. So I have deep roots here, a real vested interest in representing my community. We often, having driven through the Tideflats and living right above the Tideflats, I'm very acutely aware of the impacts that some of the industries down there have on the people who live near the port or near the Tideflats. And I want to support, and we'll talk about this later, but I have a vision to share with you that kind of departs from our historical past and I'll get into it later, but I want to make sure that we all have an open mind and we work together. I was one of the original authors of the buffer zone amendment. And for those of you that may or may not know about that, prior to the sub-area plan idea being formed and moving forward, Northeast Tacoma submitted a buffer zone proposal to look at zoning specifically in the area that where residential and heavy industrial, meet. So again, we had a vision. I've been working towards it for many years now, and I look forward to seeing the results of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Derek Urquhart.
Good morning. Thank you for having me as well. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And my name is Derek Urquhart. I'm with Neil Walter Company. Spent a little over the last 20 years working on industrial development and distribution, focused mainly in the Port of Tacoma, Frederickson, Nally Valley, and the other industrial districts along I-5. Spent 6 years of my career managing the industrial real estate department at the Port of Tacoma, making acquisitions for terminal expansion, and continue to work on the acquisition, cleanup, redevelopment, and redeployment of our industrial properties here in the Tacoma and Pierce County area. So again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Derek. Monique Valenzuela.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Monique Valenzuela, and I am the Executive Director and CEO of the Youth Marine Foundation. We are the premier nonprofit that serve the youth of the Puget Sound, and we have been doing so with our longest running program. The Tacoma Sea Scouts, you'll see, have been operating in the Tideflats for almost 100 years. We've been operating continuously since 1924. So through the onset of black and white TV, color TV, cable TV, and now TikTok, one thing has remained, and that's that we have 40 to 50 youth ages 13 on the water every week. So I'm very excited to share my passion for protecting areas of the Tideflats for programs like ours, because what we do is provide accessibility and provide long-term success and career for most of our underserved youth. We can't create more shoreline. So I'm very proud to share why access for youth is so important with connected trades and skills and shoreline. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Monique. And now we are going to hear from Sean Gaffney with an overview about the project.
Thanks, Marcy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sean Gaffney with Pierce County. I'm the planning manager for planning and public works, and I'm happy to be part of this project management team as this process moves along. It's large, it's interesting, it's multifaceted, and from the planning world where we come from, that's the most challenging and what makes it fun. So I'm going to go over a couple slides here to provide an overview and then talk a little more in depth regarding the land use and economic portions of this plan. So when we talk about the sub-area plan, we're dealing with 5,000 acres, including the right-of-ways and waterways total. We have a rich natural context involving obviously the shorelines. You have river deltas, tidal creeks, and the river channel corridors and associated marshes. The economic context is incredible. Over 10,000 employees with this world-class port right in the middle of it, and all the manufacturing and maritime activities associated with it as well. And most importantly, and this will be an ongoing theme, the rich cultural context of this area as it is within the Puyallup tribe survey boundary. That is something on our minds and on throughout this entire process. So I want to talk about the goals of the project. This is a joint planning process. It's involving the 5 governments, as mentioned earlier. And if you look at the slide, the things we're trying to deal with here between all the agencies and interests are what does development look like? What's there? Create benchmarks of what's there and what's it going to look like, the environmental review that goes along with this plan, and of course, strategic capital investments and how that's all captured into a planning document like this. On the table today for us to deal with, we're trying to create a vision statement that describes the kind of future that the community desires to help and guide this sub-area plan and the environmental impact statement alternatives, that being a range of the status quo out to what could be and anything in between. In this process, it is grounded in the reality and the aspirations of the future. We do have a port. We have this manufacturing industrial center that was mentioned that's there, and it's important to our community. The visioning will build on that. And some of the things we are going to be spending a lot of time focusing on will be the overall health of the Tideflats, ways to preserve and expand existing employment, of course, the infrastructure, the roads, all the infrastructure that support this, this center, as well as how do we deal with and be mindful of keeping a healthy environment, the plentiful salmon, shellfish in this urban environment, and make it safer for the communities and associated residents surrounding it. Next slide. So where we're at in the process, we had a public kickoff earlier in the year, followed by a series of visioning meetings and an online survey. We'll be hosting another meeting in May to report out on our visioning process and the scoping of the EIS. And then from there on, we'll be working right on through the rest of the year of 2021 and probably early into 2022 on doing that draft EIS work and the plan framework. So the planning framework, I want to talk a little bit about that. Any planning document like this, you have to bring informed information by all the participants. Those of you in the meeting today, the state, the regional and local planning guidance has to be taken into consideration. This effort will all become part of the City of Tacoma's comprehensive plan, which takes like any comp plan, takes a long-range perspective on topics that address the economic health, social health, physical health of the city. This next slide, thank you. So this area is continually been changing to meet the needs of the region since non-Native American settlement. The Tideflats hold such a rich history. Long before the non-Native settlement was here, this area was a valuable resource for subsistence, travel, and trade, and economic opportunities for the Native communities that were living on the shores of the Puget Sound and all throughout the Whitewater Puyallup watershed. It's played a dynamic role, of course, in the development of the city we live in, of Tacoma, and obviously it's become an ocean cargo operation that rivals anything on the West Coast. The Native settlement in Commencement Bay, non-Native settlement, started in the mid-1800s. By the 1900s, the city was well on its way to developing. The port grew as the city grew, and it was extended in the 40s and the mid-century of 20th century. And it's been growing ever since. And of course, it's been adapting to new technologies, the mechanized container process, ship loading and unloading that we've all seen develop over the last 30 years down at the port. And it's also necessitated widening of the waterways, lengthening, deepening, and new pier construction warehouses, which is one of the reasons we're here. And that brings up compatibility issues, which we'll continue to talk about. Next slide, please. So I want to talk more about the land use and economic development. Looking at now, these little clusters that basically locate the workers are in the Tideflats. Of course, smaller dots, less. The Tideflats is part of this regional ecosystem of manufacturing industrial centers. The Tideflats has long identified Tacoma and the region, and it continues to be a major part of the city's identity and supports family wage jobs and promotes an economic diversity. Reflecting its wider impact, the Tideflats is a regional job center drawing from workers across the region. And mentioned earlier, it does support making and moving things, fishing, trade, community, all these things that support our economic success in the area. The slide that you're looking at now just shows a distribution of where the jobs are. We're talking, over 10,000 jobs currently in 2019 that we're likely to see 1,000 more. And the main sector is the wholesale trade transportation sector, constitutes 42%, manufacturing 26%, services 19%, and then some of the other retails lesser and lesser, and some of the public utility type uses. One thing about these jobs is we do see an increase. A lot of these jobs are industrial jobs, and they don't always require a formal education and the college graduates. It provides great jobs that can often provide earnings of over $100,000 a year, things you don't see in other sectors. So it's very important to keep an eye and focus on the economic opportunities here. When you look at the next map that just went up, we're talking about almost 4,000 acres that constitutes about 750 parcels. The activities involve container, intermodal transportation, manufacturing, fisheries, construction, all these support and fringe uses that all contribute to the larger production of the Port of Tacoma. The existing policies in the city of Tacoma already, and the regional policies for that matter, already have a strong focus that provide protection of industrial lands. However, it has been some time, over 10 years probably, since the city's updated the industrial land use policies. And existing zoning continues to be a concern with surrounding neighbors and those up in Northeast Tacoma. And there are incompatible uses and industrial activity that have been identified and will be addressed as part of this planning process. Lastly, I want to talk a little bit about what's surrounding. We talked about compatibility, and just the slide here shows some of the things when you get up to the Marine View Drive, SR 509, that eastern edge. You have Julia's Gulch up there, that 60-acre property owned by the port. It's managed by Metro Parks. And there's Viewpoint Park, and there's housing and a lot of forested areas, as you know, very steep topography in these areas, and they create somewhat of a separation along this side of the study area, but there is a lot of focus going into this area. When you move to the southwest of the area, that's when you're getting down on Puyallup Avenue and East 25th Street. Of course, we have a lot of parking areas, low density development, Tacoma Dome Station, and the streetcar link is down there, as well as the Emerald Queen Casino and the other tribal government uses on that portion. And interesting enough, on the southeastern edge, There's this area between I-5. It's on the southeastern edge between I-5 within the city limits of Fife, but it's dominated by some commercial uses. But this area is a tribal community, and it's informally known as Youngsville. And that's something I did not know until engaging in this process. And of course, the city of Tacoma, we have the Theophos waterway separating the city core from the port area. So what I'm going to leave you with now as we move on through the rest of our hour, key questions we want to answer. How can the plan strengthen and grow established sectors? 2, how can we continue to provide the family wage industrial jobs? 3, how can the Tideflats position itself for the future? And lastly, how should we address transitions and compatibility in other areas adjacent to the industrial areas? So that's all I have at this point. I think I'm going to send it back to Marcy for the panel discussion.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
Before we begin the panel discussion, I just want to remind our audience, anyone interested in asking questions, please put those in the Q&A. I notice a couple have come in. We will take those following each of the sections of the panel discussion. So our first question for the panelists is, with respect to land use and economic development, what is the biggest opportunity in the Tideflats? And what is a significant barrier to achieving that opportunity? What I am going to do is invite each panel member to address that question. And I think I'll go in a reverse order this time and start with Monique.
Thank you. So in speaking about the biggest opportunity in the Tideflats area specifically, and I actually see some questions that I'd love to address and tie back to that. The biggest opportunity is access to, especially connecting with hands-on skills and connected trades opportunities for our communities of color. It is no surprise that we're surrounded by water, and not just the port of Tacoma, but many of the maritime sectors. So think about all the private businesses within the Tideflats and the industry. Many of these businesses are maritime related. Well, when you're growing up on 74th and Pacific, and you're landlocked and you're not a member of a yacht club, you really don't know what you don't know. And with our youth, what we've seen the biggest success has been is getting them into programs on the water, introduce them to international opportunities. The biggest thing that I love about the opportunities that Tideflats gives us as well is diversity. Diversity of skills. There are jobs in the Tideflats because of the nature of the industry that are very high entry level points where you have to have a degree, you have to have a lot of trade background, and that's fine. There are also entry points within the Tideflats jobs and companies that are very low barrier entry points, where if you don't have a high school diploma but a GED, because of the nature of the maritime sector, a lot of our youth that maybe don't have that baccalaureate pathway can enter at a low barrier entry point and succeed. It is very much a meritorious industry. And so the biggest opportunity for me is that the many opportunities that our citizens and our young people can enter into these amazing, great paying jobs with great paying benefits, whether they're union jobs or non-union jobs, you can support your family on with all the different diversities. Many of the kids that we've dealt with do come from underserved communities, and they didn't grow up on boats. Financially, they just didn't have the opportunity. But having the Tideflats accessible to programs that need that and then connecting them to the different sectors means that they are now able to have an entry point that's comfortable to them. They can succeed. We also build agency in that, because a lot of these companies will actually pay for ongoing training or ongoing education. That is really unique in the maritime industry. And it's something that, especially being here in Tacoma and South Puget Sound, our success rate is through the roof. I send 3 to 4 youth every year to Cal Maritime. I send 2 to 3 youth straight to industry. So high school diploma or GED going straight into a connected skills job. And that is really because of their access to the connections we have all around us, our good neighbors and support, but also because they can get on the water and have experiences to try it out. So I think the biggest opportunity is the diversity that we can offer to all the people of Puget Sound, and the different entry points for well-paying, family-sustaining jobs for our citizens.
It sounds like you're already realizing much of that wonderful opportunity that you just outlined. Are there barriers to that you see in moving forward?
Thank you, Marcia. I think there are a couple of barriers. I think that one of the barriers I see is just not taking the time to understand that all of these different shareholders and stakeholders all have great intentions. Whether I sit on the opposite side of thought to someone else, the biggest barrier is the misconception that industry, environment, education can't all live together on the Tideflats. I oftentimes will tell my youth, you know, we need to stop talking in the third person, them, they, and start talking in the first person, us and we. The biggest barrier is the perception that if I can only get rid of, you know, the people that have a different agenda, then I can get done what I need to. That's not going to happen, people. We all have to coexist. And I think if we take the time to really sit down and understand, my perception is that you're a big, dirty industry. A lot of the new owners of the businesses in the Tideflats are actually second and third generation owners, and they want to be as environmentally friendly as possible. So I tell them a lot of times, I want my kids to get on the water because they're going to be the ones creating these green technologies with you. They're very open. But I really do think a barrier is for us to create silos. And I see that all the time. So start talking in the first person, us, we on the Tideflats, we in Tacoma, and not, you know, in the third person of they, them. We're all in this together. So if we can just do sessions like this and collaborate, I think we're really gonna role model for everyone that we can all share the Tideflats together and all kind of have a good result from it.
Excellent. Thank you for your thoughts. Now I'm going to turn to Derek with the same question. What's the biggest opportunity in the Tideflats, and what is a significant barrier to achieving it? Derek, I think you're muted. Derek? There we go.
There we go. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, I believe the greatest opportunity is starting with what I see here is multi-agency business and community collaboration, bringing the many cities and jurisdictions from Pierce County, City of Five, City of Tacoma, Port of Tacoma, you know, all who have staff and commissioners and council members and residents that try and collaborate on these efforts to streamline those. As a quick example, we see many businesses that might be high truck volume end up on the east side of I-5 based on, you know, permitting timelines or other things that really aren't a good long-term decision maker for those businesses that could locate on the west side, closer to the terminals. Same with the manufacturing, some of our chemical uses on the Tideflats. We see them pushed in or pushed out for reasons that don't make long-term sense. So I think collaboration between the agencies, the businesses, and the communities, I truly believe too, is working with many of these private industries down there. Some of them are the most innovative in things like stormwater controls, and actually introduce those things to the Port of Tacoma or Pierce County or others to look at new ways that these innovative businesses have created to be better stewards of the environment, operate more cleanly. As a prior panelist just said, I'm dealing mostly with third generation business owners now, and they label themselves as the remediation generation that are working on cleaning up and conscious decisions as their businesses, as that has now become very important with their customers as well as the community they're in. I think the biggest obstacle that I see in that really in unknowns when businesses come to town and they more jurisdictions and try and collaborate and try and create budgets and timelines to get their, whether it be terminals or new facilities or distribution warehouses or, even permit some of the environmental areas. I worked on the acquisition of Julia's Gulch, and it was one of the first where we actually built into the budget ongoing maintenance and stewardship of the site. So that was very innovative at the time. A lot of times we would acquire these habitat sites and there wouldn't be fundings or budgets. And then we were able to get the local Tideflats business community on board and make them stewards of that, let their employees engage in stewarding the environment and really seeing the full circle effect that everyone can live together.
Great. Thank you, Derek. Yvonne, with the same question, what's the biggest opportunity in the Tideflats and what's a significant barrier to achieving that opportunity?
From my perspective, I think the biggest opportunity would be to position ourselves for succeeding on the vision and positioning ourselves for the jobs, the clean, innovative industries of the future, and not necessarily clinging to those industries of the past, right? There are, if you look nationally, with the new administration, the direction is going away from many of these industries. And why wouldn't Tacoma want to be on the leading edge of that, right? We have to do it for climate change reasons. We have to do it because it's a densely populated city, people that want their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren to inherit the best possible Tacoma that we can provide them. And that starts now. The opportunity is to set a vision that establishes that priority as a priority. We want to position for jobs and for companies and industries that are green, healthy, high-paying wage jobs. Let's get innovative and creative in how we invite new industries or invite existing industries to transform themselves to be the Tacoma that we want. I think the biggest barrier to that is there seems to be a lack of will, I guess it would be lack of will to move beyond, and there is a tendency to cling to existing industries. In fact, in one of the slides that was earlier, you talked about how can we support established sectors, right? And I think at the last joint meeting between the Tideflats Advisory Group and the steering committee, there was a reminder to everyone that this is not a blank slate, this sub-area planning process. And it's going to have guardrails that keep us in a particular lane. That to me, it was a big red flag. So I see that kind of thinking as the greatest barrier. I mean, like, for example, one of the things I would like to see is our side of the water is a waterfront. It's a massive waterfront, and it hasn't been really treated that way by the city of Tacoma or the tenants who use the property along Marine View Drive. So anyway, that's what I see is the biggest barrier. Thanks.
Thank you, Yvonne. Frank.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Same questions.
I've got it. Thank you. I appreciate it and excited about being able to answer it. Because for me, without question, the biggest opportunity is the economic development trajectory. That begins with the permanent place for industrial lands and industrial development as a place for jobs, and embracing the economic engine that has been fundamental and essential, which is the Tideflats. The way I see it, there are 2 or 3 economic engines in Pierce County. I mean, job generating economic engines, one of which, again, is the Tideflats. So a modest or middle of the road projection or analysis, if you will, of a number of jobs that are direct, indirect, and induced because of the economic activity that happens in the Tideflats is about 43,000 in the state of Washington. And that doesn't include Denali Valley, for example, or other industrial areas. And when I think about that, 80% of those jobs are connected to the Tideflats. That's about 35,000 jobs. So building on the economic trajectory is not only important, it's key to a vibrant future for a greener, cleaner, proven way to have a robust future for our families. And it's our biggest opportunity for economic prosperity as a pathway, without a doubt. If I looked at what barriers might be to that opportunity, for me, it's real simple. Short-sighted land use regulations. And candidly, whether you are talking about Tideflats area planning processes or non-interim regulations, short-sighted land use restrictions would do permanent damage to our local economy, far beyond our current COVID-19 crisis. Now, I have shared previously that a common sense, balanced approach to land use regulations is critical. And those of us who are invested in the business interests, in the manufacturing, industrial, and maritime interests, and those communities in which they serve, we continue to seek this opportunity and approach for the long-term economic wellness of those communities and their families.
Thank you, Frank.
You bet.
Now, we are going to take a couple of questions from the audience. I see there are a number of excellent questions showing up here. I'm going to turn to Deborah and Radhika to suggest one or two that we take for our panel. And I'll mention as well, we will work at getting responses to the whole set of questions that we see here. But given our available time today, let's take a question or two from the audience. Deborah or Radhika, who would like to?
Deborah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Thanks for saying that. We wanted to reiterate, there are quite a range of questions, and we will post answers to the project website later for the ones that we don't get to today. So one question, our first question that we wanted to ask is, how can habitat restoration and environmental sustainability be a greater element of land use and economic development planning? Want me to say that again?
If you could just lean into your mic a little more, Deborah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay, I'm leaning in right now. Can you hear me?
A little more.
Radhika, do you want to try? I'm having some microphones.
Yeah, so the question that we thought could be answered live is, how can habitat restoration and environmental sustainability be a greater element of land use and economic development planning? And I put this question in the chat as well.
So who would like to begin in response?
Well, I can speak a little bit to my experience. One of the things that we have the pleasure of doing here at the Tacoma Youth Marine Center is we actually host a marine science high school for the last 2 years. It seems like we should have had one a long time ago, but for some reason, school districts are a little risk averse and don't like kids on the water. So every week we have a science classroom on site. And one of the things the students have been doing for 2 years is actual on-water testing. So the question talks about habit restoration and environmental sustainability. My answer would be, first of all, everybody has a different definition of environmental sustainability. And the kids teach me more than I teach them. And that's one of the things we talked about. So when you look at environmental sustainability, maybe what your or my definition is not necessarily a blanket definition. And that's where sometimes it gets lost in translation, because one person's very hard, in the box, I want this to be it, may not be easily mitigated with an industry or with an education or even with a municipality, for example. There are different legislative rules that they have to abide by. So I really am thinking about how can we have them be a greater element of land use. There was a time when we had organizations, both nonprofit, municipal, and for-profit businesses that had a very collaborative, hey, this is what's going on, or if there was something like a spill or you know, a barge had an accident. It was a very collaborative and educational approach. And that's why I love this question. We have to get to a point where a business is not afraid to call a very highly collaborative environmental entity to say, we have had something happen that can be cause for, you know, environmental harm or damage. We need some education. We need some help. We're being completely transparent. And how can we move forward? It was also a little bit more proactive, a little more carrots and less sticks as well. Again, a lot of the businesses, and I will speak, you know, for the Tideflats area specifically, manufacturing, are doing environmentally sustainable and very innovative programming within their business. It may not be something that fits, like I said, the very black and white mold, but I think that's what it starts with. The second with sustainability and habitat restoration is the education. We have Center for Urban Waters right down the street. And again, I have a marine science classroom, but unless you can afford the tuition at University of Washington, Tacoma, you're probably not gonna have access to those labs. So I really think that getting the public school students, specifically starting with Tacoma Public Schools, on the water, in programs, it gives them agency, and it also gives them skin in the game. Because remember, most of Tacoma is not on the Tideflats. So when they're all the way in South Tacoma and their dad's changing oil in the car, or grandpa, they're gonna say, hey, I know what you're doing, and that's gonna help in some way. So it really does begin with the youngest, you know, K through 12 citizens that we have, and giving them access to Tideflats and making sure that we're protecting access points for youth. To me, that's going to be a really key factor.
Very good. Thank you, Monique. And because of our time frame, we actually are going to move on to our next question, and then we will continue as time allows to take questions from our group. I think we may also ask all our panelists after the fact if they have thoughts on these questions that are coming in, some really good thoughts and participation from our audience as well. So the second question we have is with respect to our topics of land use and economic development, how does the Tideflats look and function 20 years from now? And I am going to start with Yvonne this time, then go to Frank, Derek, and then Monique. So Yvonne.
There, okay. I would like to just paint a picture of Tacoma 20 years from now. My kids are, one's in college and one's about to go to college. I want them to be able to come back here and want to come back here because the opportunities are great. And this is a great place to raise their family, to raise their, to be with my grandchildren in the land that I've called home for all this time. And what I like to see, you know, is an attainable vision, is that the Tideflats area and basically all of Tacoma be an area where there is no emissions. There's no spills. There's no big incidents. We want zero emissions from any business, zero incidents, that no spills in the water. We want clean water. We want clean land. We want clean air. And how we get there is the strategy, right? But the vision, that is my vision. And I hope that others share it. I know that I represent a community of 20,000 people that, you know, have really faced a lot of stuff in the past year or two with the Stericycle fire, the fumigant fire, hazardous materials, toxic smoke. The asphalt plant blew up, which is right underneath our community last fall, and major fire. And the city didn't have the setup to get us notification that we should shelter in place. We just had a big fire on a shipping vessel just a few weeks ago. Again, burned for 4 or 5 days, toxic smoke coming into our community. The animal rendering plant, you know, it malfunctioned and buried all of Tacoma in this horrible funk smell. It was unbearable, and the kids had to go to school anyway. So I'd like us to be where we move past that. We said goodbye to ASARCO. You know, we said no more smelting, right? And so what can we do to invite, what can you do as a group to attract and invest in industries and manufacturing that doesn't have all of the emissions and horrible incidents that we've been experiencing. So I want a proud Tacoma that my great-grandchildren can inherit, that's clean and a wonderful place to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Frank.
I see 20 years from now, certainly a place that has anchored economic prosperity in its traditional economic engine. I also see that being an opportunity for families to usher in a new trajectory that is a robust, bustling forecast that is led by a world-class port, where we've got a gateway that invites trade, where we have expectation for a healthy scenario for our families. I believe that that means a greener and cleaner and fairer future that came from a balanced approach to how we felt we should move forward. And I submit that the challenge of short-sighted land use regulations would inhibit us from getting there. I also anticipate that because of a collaborative effort that recognizes a place for industrial development, we can have that as fundamental to build upon greener, healthier ways forward. I believe that's exactly the way that we need to move now. I think that is the solution to a robust and, again, world-class experience that is supported ultimately by jobs that are anchored from the Tideflats and moving through leadership of a world-class port experience.
Thank you, Frank. Now I'm going to turn to Derek. And again, the question, what does the Tideflats look like and how does it function 20 years into the future?
Thank you. Yeah, I think looking into 20 years in the future, the collaboration and refinement between the businesses, the jurisdictions, the surrounding community will find efficiencies in the infrastructure and much more collaboration. As was said earlier, many of the companies I deal with, they have much longer employee retention and employee satisfaction locating here in the Pacific Northwest with our mountains, coastlines, streams, ability to raise families in good environments. And from a regulatory standpoint, I hope there's change in the collaboration. Not only do the regulations put in place as far as environmental stewardship, operating clean businesses, while although those bring our worst polluters up, they also put a cap on some of the businesses that we deal with that have, you know, sustainable activities they've used in other parts of the world they want to bring in. When it doesn't meet the code, they're not allowed to achieve, like we said, maybe a no emission model. It's very hard to achieve those things and still permit and entitle and turn on a business here. So I look forward to a wider open eyes from everyone as far as looking at the most sustainable practices so we can all collaborate, but really efficiency down there in the railroads, the roadways, the waterways, and the gentrification and mix so we can all collaborate together.
Very good. Thank you, Derek. And Monique.
I know you're asking what are the Tideflats, what does it look like 20 years from now? And I'll share what I hope changes, but let me share one thing I hope doesn't change. And it's that we can't create more shoreline again. And we do have to have access points for youth programs. So when I look at what I hope to be the same, I'll give you a snapshot. Again, 1960, these are youth on the water. Many of these youth own businesses. And when I talk about industry, it would be woodworking. For example, Rich Light creates cutting boards that are used in most hotels in the industry, most of your homes. We have other cabinet makers. We have people that create waterproof paper right here in the Tideflats so that we don't have to tear down more trees and we can use that no matter what over and over. This is this year. These are my youth with masks on. And we never thought in the middle of a pandemic, we'd still have kids going and becoming productive members of their community, but they are. So what I hope doesn't change, and that's the same vessel, by the way, she's 90 years old this year, wooden vessel. We take very good care of her. So when you look at longevity and being conscientious of using our assets, the longest life possible, this vessel was only supposed to last for 10 years and she's 90 years old this year, and the kids are the ones that take care of her. So the one thing I'll add that I hope doesn't change is that we continue to leave avenues for our youth to access the water through a working waterfront and continue to have connections. I do agree. My grandkids, I have 3 grandkids, I have 6 kids. I want them to have a healthy future. And those kids getting on the water now as 7th graders are going to be the ones the light bulb's going to tick. And they're going to help us reduce emissions, and they're going to help think about different ways to do it and do it greener, but they're not if they don't have access and see what's around them. So I guess I know the question is, what does the Tideflats look like? The one thing I hope is still here in 20 years is what has been here since 1924. And that's youth programs on the water, specifically on the east side of the Foss Waterway, that have gone on continually.
Great. Thank you, Monique. A lot of, I think, shared overlap in everyone's view for the future. And I think the we is going to be an important part of this whole planning effort at getting to that future that everyone hopes to achieve. I am now going to ask either Deborah or Radhika for one more question from our audience. And again, we will respond to all of these questions as well and get them posted to the website.
Right. Marcy, I'll just read the question. I put it in the chat earlier and I can put it again. This is about the topic of industrial jobs in the Tideflats. The question is, what kinds of jobs in the clean energy industries can Tacoma entertain to maintain success in taking care of the environment?
Is there one of our panelists that is particularly eager to respond to that one? I heard it touched on to some degree by everyone. Yvonne, I see you unmuting your mic.
No, I was just, I definitely don't have the answer to that question. I would hope that our partners in the economic development groups, and maybe even you as the consulting firm or staff, have already done a lot of work to uncover what those industrial jobs are. That's one of the main things I'd love to hear from as well. What kind of research are you doing to uncover those opportunities? And I don't think we have anybody on this panel that's an economic development person, but you know, I think that I'm anxious to hear the results of their research and what they've found, because I think it's possible we could have a win-win future, right? We can preserve these high wage jobs, and we can at the same time, you know, make this whole city, this whole region, a cleaner, better place to live. So thanks.
Thank you. Do others want to make any comment? Derek or Frank or Monique?
I just wanted to reiterate that I'm sorry. I just wanted to reiterate it was extremely important to recognize that the economic engine in the Tideflats is part of the second largest economic driver when we talk about what we have available. So it's a valid question to talk about how we would go forward when we're looking specifically at the types of jobs that would make a difference. I believe that there has been demonstrative examples regarding opportunities centered really in STEM, and whether that's an opportunity for reskilling or upskilling. Our workforce development plans and systems have begun to connect with the educational communities, which, by the way, is really our third economic engine driver. And that is how we begin to build in ways that complement our industrial development as it now appears. What is extremely important, I believe a lot of people misunderstand, is there is this expectation that you can just leap from one opportunity that is driving and supporting economic vitality to this expectation of what you would like to see. It is, in fact, a cascaded scenario. You build and you respond to the opportunities that you create. We are doing that. We as an industry are looking for cleaner, greener, and fairer ways to move forward. And with that, we like to bring along and be alongside those that actually see the investment in ensuring an economic engine that we're driving, that we're controlling, that we're managing as being tantamount to how we connect our future for the Tideflats.
Very good. Thank you. With that, though I'm sure there's much more to be said on everyone's part, we actually are out of time. And so I am going to turn back to Sean to complete our session.
Thanks, Marcy. I just want to go over some of the upcoming dates. Between now and the 30th of April, we have our online survey open. March 18th, we have the environmental panel tomorrow, environmental and health, and on the 20th, the transportation and infrastructure. And on the 6th of May, we hopefully will have our visioning report out. So if there are any other closing comments, that's all I have, unless I've missed anything from the team. You feel free to chime in.
I would just like to respond. There was an early question about how public commentary that has already been put forth will influence the trajectory of the sub-area planning effort. So what I want to mention is that we are gathering information from all sources, the kickoff public meeting, some individual smaller briefings to organizations throughout Tacoma that both the PMT members and the Tideflats Advisory Group members are giving, as well as these 3 panel discussions and the questions and observations they generate from the public. All of that, and the survey, and the survey is the other. We will be organizing, gathering all that information together, and that's what we will be reporting out on. So everything we've heard from everyone, and that is the information that will be used moving forward with this whole project. So with that, what I just want to reiterate again that we will make sure that we have responses to the questions that were posed, and we will get those posted. And just in closing, I certainly want to thank our panel members. I really appreciate the range of perspectives and the experience that it's based on in their long-term interest and participation in the Tacoma Tideflats. So all of your views and insights are invaluable, I think, as we think about the future for the Tideflats. So thank you very much for participating, listening in today. And again, we have the 2 sessions coming up and would welcome having you participate in those as well. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.